Welcome back to Galactic Theories, where we explore the vast cosmos of science fiction and the profound questions it raises about our own universe. Today, we're venturing into the heart of one of Star Trek's most enduring and controversial concepts, the Prime Directive. For those unfamiliar, the Prime Directive, or General Order 1, is Starfleet's most important rule non-interference with the natural development of alien civilizations, especially those less technologically advanced. But is this principle of non-interference truly ethical? Or could allowing civilizations to evolve without aid, even in the face of catastrophe, be more malevolent than intervening to prevent disaster? Let's start by understanding the Prime Directive's origins and intentions. In the Star Trek universe, the Prime Directive, also known as General Order 1, is Starfleet's foremost and most stringent rule. It prohibits any Starfleet personnel from interfering with the natural development of alien civilizations, particularly those that are pre-warp or have not achieved faster-than-light space travel. This non-interference applies not just to direct contact, but also to indirect actions that could influence a society's progression. But why was such a strict policy put in place? The Prime Directive was established to prevent the cultural contamination and exploitation that can occur when a more advanced civilization interacts with a less advanced one. This principle stems from the recognition that even well-intentioned actions can have devastating consequences on societies not prepared for such advancements. It's a response to historical events within the Star Trek universe where interventions by advanced species led to unintended consequences, disrupting societies and causing more harm than good. For instance, in the episode A Private Little War from Star Trek the original series, Captain Kirk reflects on an earlier mission where introducing advanced technology to a primitive society led to disastrous results, escalating conflicts instead of resolving them. Supporters of the Prime Directive argue that every civilization has the right to develop at its own pace, free from external influences. They believe that interference, even with benevolent intentions, can rob a society of its agency, culture, and identity. Introducing advanced technology or knowledge can drastically alter the trajectory of a civilization, potentially erasing traditions, belief systems, and social structures that took millennia to develop. Moreover, there's the risk of dependency. If a civilization becomes reliant on outside assistance, it may never achieve its full potential. By solving their problems for them, you deny them the opportunity to grow, innovate, and adapt. This dependency can stifle creativity and hinder the development of critical thinking skills essential for their long-term survival. The Prime Directive also serves as a moral compass for Starfleet officers, reminding them of the weight of their responsibilities. With their advanced technology and knowledge, they possess immense power that could easily be misused, even unintentionally. The directive ensures that they approach exploration with humility, recognizing that they are not omniscient beings who can predict or control the outcomes of their interventions. The ethical foundation of the Prime Directive is rooted in respect for the autonomy and self-determination of all cultures. It acknowledges that every society has its unique path shaped by its environment, history, and collective experiences. Interfering with this natural progression can be viewed as a form of cultural imperialism, imposing one's values and ideals onto another society without their consent. Supporters also point out the unpredictability of interference. Even actions taken with the best intentions can lead to negative outcomes. For example, providing a cure for a disease might save lives, but could result in overpopulation, resource scarcity, or social unrest if the society isn't prepared for such changes. In essence, the Prime Directive embodies a philosophy of non-interventionism and respect for the natural evolution of societies. It serves as a guiding principle to prevent the misuse of power and to protect the integrity of all cultures, no matter how technologically advanced or primitive they may be. But here's where things get complicated. What happens when non-interference means allowing a civilization to suffer or even perish, when you have the power to prevent it? Is it ethical to stand by and watch as a planet faces mass extinction due to a natural disaster? Or to ignore a preventable war that could annihilate an entire species? This is the crux of the moral dilemma posed by the Prime Directive, the conflict between respecting a civilization's right to evolve independently and the moral imperative to prevent suffering when possible. Let's delve into some instances from Star Trek where the Prime Directive was put to the test, highlighting the complexities of this ethical quandary. In the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Pen Pals, Lieutenant Commander Data begins communicating with a young girl named Sarjenka from a pre-warp civilization on a planet facing catastrophic geological disturbances. Unbeknownst to his crew, Data forms a friendship with her, and through their conversations, he becomes aware of the imminent destruction of her world. When Data brings this information to Captain Picard and the senior staff, they are faced with a harrowing decision: uphold the Prime Directive and allow the extinction of an entire species or intervene to save them, thereby violating their most sacred principle. The crew engages in a heated debate. Some argue that their duty to preserve life supersedes the directive, while others caution against the unforeseen consequences of interference. Ultimately, compassion prevails. They choose to subtly stabilize the planet's geological activity, saving the civilization without revealing their presence. This episode raises critical questions about the rigidity of the Prime Directive. Is adherence to a principle worth the loss of an entire species? Does the value of life outweigh the potential risks of intervention? In another episode from The Next Generation titled Homeward, Worf's foster brother, Nikolai Rozhenko, is stationed on Baral 2, a planet with a pre-warp civilization facing atmospheric collapse. As the planet's destruction becomes inevitable, Nikolai takes it upon himself to save a group of villagers by creating a holographic environment on the Enterprise, simulating their natural surroundings while relocating them to a new planet. Captain Picard is confronted with a profound ethical conflict. Nikolai's actions have already violated the Prime Directive, but sending the villagers back would mean certain death. Upholding the directive would result in the extinction of the Boralan culture, while intervening would mean compromising Starfleet's most fundamental rule. Picard grapples with this dilemma, torn between his duty to Starfleet principles and his compassion for innocent lives. In the end, he allows the relocation to proceed, but not without expressing deep concern over the potential ramifications. This episode underscores the emotional and ethical strain that strict adherence to the Prime Directive can place on individuals who are committed to both their principles and their humanity. These scenarios highlight a critical perspective. Sometimes, intervention may be the more ethical choice. If you possess the means to prevent suffering or extinction, is it not a moral imperative to act? This question echoes real-world ethical theories, particularly the views of philosopher Peter Singer. Singer advocates for the principle of beneficence, which suggests that if we can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought to do it. Applying this principle to the context of the Prime Directive raises challenging questions. Does the moral duty to prevent immense suffering override the duty to respect another civilization's autonomous development? Can inaction, in the face of preventable catastrophe, be considered a form of complicity? Critics of intervention caution against the slippery slope of compromising principles. Intervening in one situation might set a precedent that justifies further interference, eventually eroding the respect for a civilization's autonomy. There's also the risk of unintended consequences. Even well-intentioned actions can lead to negative outcomes. For example, saving a civilization from a natural disaster might alter population dynamics, strain resources, or interfere with cultural practices tied to their understanding of life and death. Moreover, there's the ethical concern of imposing one's values and solutions without fully understanding the complexities of another culture. What seems like help from one perspective might be perceived as intrusion or even aggression from another. These dilemmas suggest that a balance must be struck between the moral imperative to prevent suffering and the ethical commitment to respect other civilizations' rights to self-determination. Some argue for a more flexible interpretation of the Prime Directive, one that allows for compassionate intervention in extreme circumstances, provided it minimizes cultural contamination and respects the society's integrity. For instance, intervention could be limited to actions that prevent extinction-level events without revealing the intervening party's existence. In Pen Pals, the crew's decision to stabilize the planet without making contact is an example of such a compromise. The complexities of these situations invite a reevaluation of ethical responsibilities in the face of suffering. They challenge the notion that non-interference is inherently ethical, suggesting that there are circumstances where inaction may be morally indefensible. In the broader context of Star Trek and science fiction, these stories serve as allegories for real-world issues, such as humanitarian intervention, foreign aid, and the responsibilities of powerful nations toward those in crisis. If a society is on the brink of self-destruction due to war or preventable disaster, does respecting their evolutionary path outweigh the value of their lives? These questions aren't just science fiction, they mirror real-world debates. In our world, nations grapple with when to intervene in humanitarian crises, genocides, or to provide disaster relief. There's a constant tension between respecting sovereignty and fulfilling moral obligations to help. Let's delve deeper into this critical juncture, where non-interference crosses into the realm of neglect. At what point does choosing not to act become an ethical failing? In the context of the Prime Directive, non-interference is meant to protect civilizations from external influence. However, when a society faces imminent destruction, be it from natural disasters, pandemics, or internal conflicts, the cost of inaction becomes profoundly human. In Star Trek, this dilemma is often dramatized to highlight the moral complexities. The crew members, bound by their commitment to the Prime Directive, frequently find themselves questioning whether adherence to this principle is justifiable when lives are at stake. Philosophers and ethicists have long debated the moral obligations individuals and states have toward others. Utilitarian perspective suggests that actions should be taken if they result in the greatest good for the greatest number. From this view, intervening to prevent mass suffering is morally justified. Deontological ethics focuses on adherence to moral duties and rules. Non-interference aligns with the duty to respect sovereignty, but conflicting duties arise when human rights are violated. Virtue ethics emphasizes moral character, and virtues such as compassion and benevolence. A virtuous agent might feel compelled to intervene to alleviate suffering. Is there a way to honor the principles of non-interference while also preventing neglect? Some suggest that interventions should be multilateral, involving multiple nations or international organizations to share responsibility and legitimacy. Proportional and limited actions should be the minimum necessary to address the crisis without imposing additional harm or unwarranted influence. Focused on consent, whenever possible, gaining the consent of the affected population or legitimate representatives. In the context of the Prime Directive, this could translate to providing aid in ways that minimize cultural contamination, such as offering anonymous assistance or using technology to prevent disasters without revealing oneself. Maybe it's time to rethink the Prime Directive. The moral quandaries and real-world parallels we've discussed suggest that the Prime Directive, while well-intentioned, may not be the ultimate ethical guideline in every situation. Its strict enforcement can lead to outcomes that conflict with basic humanitarian principles. Perhaps it's time to consider whether this doctrine should evolve to meet the complexities of the galaxy, or our world, as we understand them today. Instead of an absolute rule, it could be a guiding principle with room for discretion based on ethical considerations. Transforming the Prime Directive from an inflexible mandate into a flexible framework allows for nuanced decision-making. This approach acknowledges that while non-interference is valuable, it shouldn't override the moral imperative to prevent suffering and save lives when possible. By incorporating ethical discretion, Starfleet officers, or leaders in our own world, can assess situations individually, considering both the potential benefits and the risks of intervention. This doesn't mean abandoning the core ideals of respect and non-exploitation, but rather adapting them to ensure that adherence to policy doesn't come at the expense of compassion and moral responsibility. After all, morality isn't always black and white. Context matters. Ethical decision-making is rarely straightforward. What is considered morally right in one context might not hold in another. Rigid rules can oversimplify complex situations, leading to choices that feel unjust or inhumane. Recognizing the importance of context allows for a more sophisticated ethical framework that can adapt to the nuances of each unique scenario. In the face of imminent disaster or mass suffering, a flexible approach permits intervention when it aligns with overarching humanitarian values, even if it means bending traditional protocols. So, is the Prime Directive really ethical? The answer isn't straightforward. While the intention behind non-interference is to prevent harm, rigid adherence can lead to greater evils, allowing preventable suffering, extinctions, and the loss of entire cultures. The Prime Directive's ethical standing depends largely on its application. As an absolute, unbending rule, it can paradoxically become a source of harm, forcing individuals and organizations to ignore their moral instincts and humanitarian duties. However, when applied as a guiding principle with allowances for ethical judgment, it can strike a balance between respecting other civilizations' autonomy and fulfilling a moral obligation to assist those in dire need. Perhaps true ethical responsibility lies in carefully weighing the consequences of both action and inaction, striving to preserve life and culture without imposing one's will. A balanced approach requires critical evaluation of each situation, considering factors such as the potential for cultural contamination, the severity of the crisis, and the desires of the affected population. It emphasizes the importance of minimizing harm while maximizing good, aligning actions with both ethical principles and compassionate instincts. This approach also involves transparency and accountability. Decision makers should be prepared to justify their choices, reflecting on the ethical frameworks that guide them and being open to scrutiny and dialogue. Now it's your prime time to chime in. Do you think the Prime Directive should remain untouched, or is it time to set phasers to stun and rethink this cosmic guideline? Don't be a redshirt. Leave a comment below and join the conversation. If this video engaged you, make sure to warp over to that like button and subscribe to Galactic Theories for more stellar content. Until next time, keep exploring the final frontier of thought, and may your curiosity live long and prosper.